Hello world and welcome to this video. So for today, I'll be showing you how to solve using z-test and t-test. But before that, let's define what is z-test and t-test na muna. So z-test is a statistical test for the mean of a population. So it can be used when n is greater than or equal to 30. So best advisable siya to use when your n or sample size is greater than or equal to 30. And we assume that the population is normally distributed. And we have the population standard deviation, which that is known to us. So to solve for d-test, we have the following formula. So z is equals to the sample mean minus the population mean over the population standard deviation divided by the square root of the sample size. So usually z-test is used to solve uh, or to compare population sample to a well-defined population. So doon siya madalas ginagamit. Next, we have the t-test. So for the t-test, there same with z-test, it is a statistical test also for the mean. And it is used when the population is normally small, or we can say it is less than 30, and the population standard deviation is unknown or it's not given to us. So for the t-test, we have the following formula. So the t statistic value is equals to the sample mean minus the population mean over the sample standard deviation divided by the square root of the sample size. So for the t-test, we need to have the uh, degrees of freedom, which is computed using the sample size minus 1. So usually, or t-test is used if you want to determine if there is a statistically significant difference between two independent groups or independent sample groups na gusto nating i-test. So, z-test and t-test have um, right tail, left tail, and can be two-tailed. So, what are those? So, when we obtain the values for z-test or t-test, it depends on how the hypothesis is formulated. So, if the alternative hypothesis is pertaining to less than, so usually the problems using the less keyword or less than. So, given the critical value, so if the t-test or z-test obtained statistic value is less than the critical value, then we reject for the hypothesis which is less than, using less than inequality. So if the problem is using greater than inequality for the hypothesis, so given the critical value of z-test or t-test, the value, the statistic value we obtained from z-test or t-test, uh, given that it is greater than the critical value, then we reject. Nandito kasi yung rejection area. Otherwise, we accept or not reject the null hypothesis. If you're pertaining to two-tailed, usually the keyword here is differs, or you're considering both negative and positive, or left and right tail. So, the inequality symbol is not equal usually, or yan yung madalas ginagamit. So, if you're using not equal, you have two critical values. So, the positive and negative one. So, if the z statistic or t statistic value you obtained is less than the negative critical value, then we reject. This is the rejection region. Also, if you obtain a z or t statistic value which is greater than the positive critical value we obtained, so we also reject. We only not reject if it is inside this area. So again, pag the hypothesis is less than the retrieved critical value, so we check the statistic value we obtained if less than siya doon sa critical value. If less than, we reject. Then pag we are using the right-tailed or the greater than symbol. So if the obtained statistic value is greater than the critical value, we reject. And if both, you're considering both. So if the value is less than the critical or greater than the critical value you obtain uh, in the both signs or negative positive, so we reject them. So let's have example to show this one. Ayan. So in this example, a researcher claims that the average cost of women's cosmetics is less than 80. Then selecting a random sample of 36 cosmetics from different stores. So we got an average of 75. This is the sample mean. So is there enough evidence to support the researcher's claim? So given that the alpha is 0.10 and assuming that the standard deviation of the population is 19.2. So let's solve this one. And so I have a scratch paper here. Let's solve. So first, we list down all the given. Sulat muna natin yung mga given. So it was stated that the population mean, so we have the population mean, which is equal to 80. And then we have the 36 cosmetics. So ito yung randomly selected. So this is your n is equals to 36. So from the 36 you obtain a 75 mean. So this is the sample mean. Is equals to 75. Ayan. And then given the alpha, so yung alpha natin is 0.10 and the population standard deviation is equal to 19.2. Ayan. So observing the values we obtained, so we have 36 for the sample size and then we also have the standard deviation. So observing this problem, we will be solving using the z-test. Ayan. So to solve for z-test, check natin yung formula para sigurado. Ayan. So z is equals to the sample mean, which is the 75, minus the population mean, which is 80, over the standard deviation, population standard deviation, which is 0.10 over divided by the square root of the sample size, which is 36. So computing this in a calculator, so this will give us a value around, so z is equals to negative 1.5625. So this will be our z value. So how do we know if we reject or accept or do not reject the hypothesis? So what is your null hypothesis? So let's move here. So the null hypothesis is that the mean is equal to 80 and the alternative or the ha is the u is less than 75. How do we know if we reject this one or do not reject? And is it okay to say that we can support the researcher's claim? So let's see. Since we are using z-test, so tingin tayo sa table ng z-test. So this is our z-table. So medyo maliit lang. I hope you see the values here. So you can refer naman sa internet for the z-table. So given the alpha, which is 0.10, so we look for the 0.10 here sa ating z-table. So Since wala siya dun sa positive, we look for the negative. So hanapin natin siya dito, yung 0.10. So we look for the value of 0.10. So dito siya sa bandang negative 1.2. So check natin siya. So since 0.10 do not have the exact value, so we check for the nearest. So ang nearest sa kanya is 0.1003. So this is the nearest. So for this table, so if you're looking for a certain alpha and it is not exact, so you get the nearest one. So the nearest one is 0.1003. So it is located in the negative 1.2, negative 1.2 here, and 0.08. Ayan. So we have the critical value of negative 1.28. Ayan. So this is your critical value. So this is how you get the critical value from the Z table. Assuming that we have an alpha of 0.05, so we look for the Z table kung nasaan yung 0.05. So looking at this one, so around nandito siya. So check natin. So this one, we have 0.0505 and we have 0.0495. So we usually look for the nearest one if hindi sila exact. So since our alpha is 0.05, there are two possible critical value. Kasi when you get the difference or the absolute difference from this one and this one, you will get both 0.0005. So which of this one ang gagamitin nyo? So in practice, they get the average of these two and then round off to 2 decimal places. So the critical value for 0.0505 is negative 1.64. So listen natin. It's negative 1.64. And then this is for 0.0505 na alpha. Next, we have also, isa mga labi sa kanya, si 0.0495. So, we get its critical value, which is negative 1.65. So, negative 1.65 for alpha around 0.0495. So, bakit ulit natin siya kinuha? Kasi these two are the nearest one kay alpha na 0.05. So, to get our final critical value, so we add these two and divide. So, let's have a calculator. And so, negative 1.64 plus negative 1.65 then divided by 2. So we have negative 1.645. So we have negative 1.645. So round off natin siya into 2 decimal. So we will get answer of negative 1.65. So ito yung magiging final answer natin for the critical value with alpha 0.05. And by practice, ito yung ginagamit. How we will know if we reject this one or not. So based on the inequality, so So we are using less than here. Less than yung gamit natin. So since less than siya, we're using the left tail test. So given the critical value, the z test or z statistic value should be less than the critical value. So check natin siya. So is negative 1.5625 less than negative 1.28. Negative 1.5625 is less than negative 1.28. We can say that the null hypothesis is rejected. So we reject this one. Since nasa rejected region siya. So reject natin yan. So with this one, we can say that there is enough evidence to support the claim of the researcher. So yes, there is enough evidence to support the claim of the researcher. So this is for the z-test. So next, we move to our next example. So move tayo sa next example natin. So in this example, we have a physician claims that a jogger's maximal volume oxygen uptake is greater than the average of all adults. So a sample of 15 jogger has a mean of 40.6 milliliters per kilogram and the standard deviation of 6 ml per kg. So if the average of all adults is 36.7, so is there enough evidence to support the physician's claim? So first, we list down all the givens of problem. So sample of 15 joggers. So our n is equal to 15. Ayan. And then has a mean of 40.6. So we have a sample mean which is equal to 40.6. And standard deviation, so sample standard deviation is equal to 6. If the average of all adults, so we have the population mean is equal to 36.7. Is there enough evidence to support that? Given that the alpha, so we have the alpha equals to 0.05. So let's check muna kung right-tailed, two-tailed siya, or left-tailed. So since nakita natin keyword na greater than, we assume the alternative hypothesis is a right-tailed. So let's list down the hypothesis. So yung null hypothesis natin is equal yung mean natin to 36.7. Alternative, which the physician claims is is greater than 36.7. So since this is a right-tailed, so let's go to the z table and let's observe the values. So we are given the sample size, which is 15, and we don't have the population standard deviation. Ang given lang is the sample standard deviation. So with these two, we can say that t-test is more applicable to use. So let's go to the t-table. Let's see. So these are t-table. Since this is a right-tailed test, so we will be using the this column here, and we need to have the degrees of freedom. So the degrees of freedom is the sample size minus 1. So df will be equal to 14. And so look for the 14 here, and see 14, and then given the alpha, which is 0.5, which is here. So let's see the intersection of 14 and 0.5. So we have positive 1.761. So our critical value is positive 1.761. So ito yung critical value natin. If naka-left-tailed tayo, so we put negative symbol. And if two-tailed, we both put positive and negative symbol. So let's solve for the t statistic value. So t is equals to, so let's check the formula. So given the sample mean minus the population mean over the sample standard deviation divided by square root of the sample size. So substitute the values. So 40.6 minus 36.7 over 15 over 6. This is your sample standard deviation over 6 divided by square root of 15. Yan. So solving this one using a calculator, we will be having the result of 2.5174. So this will be our t statistic value. So we need to check this one with the critical value. So since right-tailed, it should be greater than to be rejected. So the obtained t statistic value is greater than the critical value. So it means this is in the critical region. Then we reject the null hypothesis. So nandito siya sa area na to. And this is your critical value. So we reject. So we reject the null hypothesis. So this is rejected. So since the null hypothesis is rejected, so there is enough evidence to support the physician's claim. So this is how you solve using z-test and t-test. So make sure to first determine kung left-tailed ba siya, right-tailed, or two-tailed. And then get the critical value. And then once you get the critical value, solve for the z-test or t-test, which is more appropriate, depende sa problem. And then after that, pag naka-greater than kayo, so the value you obtain should be greater than the critical value to be rejected. If less than naman, the value should be less than the critical value to be rejected. And if both, naka two-tailed kayo, so the obtained value should be less than or greater than the critical value you obtained to be rejected. So that's all. I hope this video helped you, and thank you.